Hello, this is Mr. Weideman, and this is Lafayette High School Functions and Trigonometry. This is help on your Deltamath homework, or it's a multiple choice, and we must find a function that is going to fit this curve. Now, the first thing we need to decide, is it a cosine or is it a sine? Well, we can really tell by how the function starts. One of our videos, we talked about this neutral axis. No, it's a axis that splits the graph perfectly from top to bottom. That will happen in every sine function. It'll happen in every cosine function. Now, what makes this function unique, or a sine function unique, is it starts at the neutral axis, and it's of a positive sign. It's going to make that first positive amplitude. It's going to make a bump. Now, if it's a negative sign, it's going to start to make that first negative amplitude. It's going to make a dip. Okay? So we can see that this one looks to me like it is a negative sign. See how it starts there at 150 and it immediately makes that first dip. All right? What if it's a cosine? Right? A positive cosine starts up at amplitude, away from the neutral axis, a maximum amplitude away from the neutral axis. And a negative cosine starts at a negative amplitude. And it's like it makes a half a bump. So a complete cycle for cosine is there's a half bump, a full dip, and another half bump to complete a cycle. Negative cosine does the same thing, but it just starts at what we call negative amplitude. All right, so we can see that ours starts at the neutral axis, and why I called it a cosine, I do not know. All right, so let's fix that, and we know then from our discussion that is a negative sine. All right, so that's the first thing that we have to do. All right, the next thing we have to do, the easiest thing, since we already have this neutral axis drawn in, is to try to find the amplitude. All right, we can see here it goes as low as 250 and as high as 350. So that total distance is 80. That's not right. That's not 80 units. We better do our math right here. Okay. Well, it's just thought I had this all squared away. Let's get this amplitude right. Okay. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares high, and each square is worth 50 points. So this amplitude up here is not 80. That amplitude is 400. And we better count that just to make sure. 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400. That's right. Okay. So, from that is 400. Okay, so that means that, if I would take the time to read this scale right, it goes up from the neutral axis 200, and it goes down from the neutral axis 200. All right, so what that gives us is we know what our amplitude is by cutting that 400 in half. So this then is going to be a negative. Let me back up. I don't like all this. It's going to be a negative 200 sine bx. And what do we do with this one? We see that vertical shift. Okay, so that vertical shift is 150. So we can throw that in there. All right, so what do we need next? What we need next is we need to figure out what B is, what the period shift is. Okay, and so let's look at our graph. and see what we got going on there. Let me try to clean up this mess as we go along. Best laid plans. Okay, so if I look at my graph, there is 1 cycle, 2 cycles. All right, so what did it go? It made a dip, it made a bump, and then it finished, and then it started all over again. So we can see that happens every 16 units. All right, so what we can do is we know the period is 16 units, and we know for a sine function that if the period for a sine function is 2 pi over b, our period is 16. So what it does is it allows us to back calculate b, which in this case is going to be pi over 8. All right, so now we're going to have the complete equation. And let's fix that mistake from earlier, because we already found the amplitude was 200. We know it's a sine and not a cosine function. B is going to be pi over 8, so when I go 2 pi divided by pi over 8, that's going to give me my 16. And then I have that then vertical shift of 150. So I choose A, B, C, or D, whatever had this equation right here. All right, well, good luck with that part of the assignment.